There are secrets out there, guys, performance marketing secrets, and knowing just one or two of them can absolutely light up your funnels. Let's go. This is the Revenue Driven CMO. I'm your host, Chris Mechanic. Join me as I uncover the secrets of the world's most elite CMOs and marketing leaders. The Revenue Driven CMO is sponsored by Web Mechanics, the AI-driven performance agency that makes you smarter. Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Revenue Driven CMO. I'm your man, Chris Mechanic, here with a really interesting guest today that I'm excited to speak with. This is a guy who came up in the mobile advertising space for the most part, had his own company, grew it to a nice run rate, sold it, and then to Gamehouse, has been a mentor at Techstars for over 10 years, so he must have seen a lot. And then somehow got into B2B. So now he's a B2B marketing leader at Flexe, where he's been for about 8 years and just really kind of rapidly ascended, it seems, there at Flexe to basically the highest marketing position. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show, SVP of Marketing at Flexe, Mr. Ryan Morel. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Great. Thank you, Chris. It's nice to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you, man. It just kind of clicked for me just now that your background is in mobile ads. And so I'm really curious about, like, how do you go from mobile ads, which is, I imagine, mostly B2C, over to the B2B side? Like, how did that happen?
So it's both surprising and not surprising. And so let me explain. So I actually started in mobile in gaming. So way back when you would buy a flip phone or Nokia, whatever, from AT&T, Verizon, et cetera. And I worked for a company that made games that were available to download from those stores. So like really tiny sort of one button games, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I started. And then the iPhone came out, and obviously that exploded in the App Store and sort of all the content that was available. And we did that. And then we saw an opportunity to start something specifically around location-based advertising. That is ultimately a two-sided network, right? You have one side of the network is advertisers, and the other side of the network is publishers or content owners, right? Mm-hmm. And you become an intermediary in the as an ad tech provider. That's what you are, basically. Intermediary in the marketplace. Okay.
Right.
So when we sold that to Gamehouse, there were people around that business helping us define how we were going to apply the technology and the learnings that we had built previously to that business. And through that process, I met one of the founders of Flexe, actually.
Gotcha.
So just over 10 years ago. And he was in the process of starting Flexe at exactly that time. I got to know him really well. And when my time was up at Gamehouse, him and I had obviously stayed in touch over a number of years. And he asked if I would come join this very small startup in the warehousing space.
Yeah.
And it was
the rest is
obviously
history.
Yeah, the rest is history. But the important part is, like, yes, it is different, B2C versus B2B. Of course, it's different. But the fundamentals of like marketplace and sort of network driven businesses there's a lot of similarities, regardless of whether it's an ad tech play or what Flexe does in enterprise logistics or Uber, right? It's a marketplace business.
Cool. Well, I want to hear all about Flexe as well, but our audience is all about those secrets. I'm really curious, what do you consider to be one of your best kept secrets to marketing success?
Yeah. Can I answer this with quotes?
Sure.
Okay. So I actually have two quotes. The first, and this is sort of just a principle of mine that I'll apply back to marketing in a second, is, and I don't remember who said these quotes originally, so we'll start there. Like, one is, it's better to keep your mouth shut and let people think you a fool than to open your mouth and prove them right. Right. So that's like quote one. And the second is, I think it's widely misattributed to Mark Twain. But it's some version of, so I would have written you a shorter letter, but I ran out of time. Yeah. And the context is important here. So let me explain why I think these are the secret. Like, one, it is all of our instinct as marketers, as leaders, as professionals, and this is true as a result of years and years of conditioning to do more, to say more, to talk as much as you can. Like, that's what marketing people do. We're excited about what we're marketing. We're excited about what our company does. And so we want to talk about it as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And that instinct is one that everybody needs to fight as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because what that results in is one, having too much content, too much thinking, too many words, too creative, too clever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because you haven't thought deeply about what you're actually trying to say, like on a consistent and ongoing basis.
Yeah.
So, I would assume, some people could hear that and sort of roll their eyes and be like, oh, okay, here's another guy talking about brevity. Like, yes, brevity is important. But there's as much, can I swear? Is that okay?
Sure.
I'm assuming.
Yeah.
There's as much shitty brief content as there is shitty long content. And being short and brief doesn't make it good. Right?
Yeah.
Like, being super thoughtful with your language and the words you choose and being consistent with them over long periods of time, like, that's where the magic is.
Yeah.
That's the important part. And, we spend at Flex an inordinate amount of time on what we write, how we say it, how we write it, how we then verbalize it. Because we know when we can create brief, yes, but also impactful and clear messages, in the voice of our customer, like words they would probably use, hopefully, that drives meaningful results. Like, I've heard multiple stories from folks in the field who come back from a meeting and say, Connor, this giant customer who's got things coming at him from all over the place, literally regurgitated our messages to them. Like, oh, well, that's the goal. And we didn't get there by just throwing up on a page. We got there by being super thoughtful and careful about what we were going to put out, what it included, what it said, and how we're going to be consistent about it.
Yeah. And that was a question that I had for you because it can be difficult. I mean, very difficult to tell the extent to which your messages are resonating. So I was wondering, like, so say that, you spend a lot of time really tightening up the copy, really, thinking through the messaging, and you deploy it very, very thoughtfully across your instances. Like, how do you then know if it's working or not?
Yep. So, I mean, it's hard. There's no silver bullet, right? So we do a number of things. One is, we get feedback from the field. Like, okay, what messages do land, what don't? That's an easy one. And it's qualitative. Of course it is. But that's our best for us. That's the best way for us to know if it's landing in the face of a customer. There's other things we do around just like basic A/B testing. Our denominators are a little small, right? Like, we don't sell to a ton of companies. We don't have millions of data points. We have thousands or hundreds of thousands. But we do use that channel. And then we do, probably not as consistently as we'd like, run AAU studies where we'll go out to the market and ask about their attitude and awareness, how they think about us. We do voice of the customer programs to hear from them how they position and perceive us. So we have a bunch of different inputs. There's no right answer. But we have found that the most valuable one is just feedback from the field, what our customers say to us.
And I mean, it's such a difficult undertaking, content in general, like, if there's a website being redesigned and that website is delayed, it's always because of the content, like 9 times out of 10. It's like, because there's multiple stakeholders, it's very important. There's a tendency from people that they sort of feel like it's carved in stone, even though the opposite is actually true. But then there's a legitimate concern that, like, you don't want to put a message out that misses the mark. So the tendency is to really think about it. And it is such a very important thing, but it's daunting given like the amount of content, like you've got your content on LinkedIn, on your website, you've got hundreds of pages on your website. Like
Yep.
how should one approach that project? How do you even like get started on that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's an important point that I missed in my sort of secret part is that you have to have a story, and that story has to have a structure, and you have to understand which channel is telling which part of the story, and what copy you're going to use. Right.
Mhm.
So like if you're starting from a blank page, a website refresh or a website update is a nightmare. Like you can't ever get it done. But if you know what your story is, your customer centric specific story, then you can just start piecing that and breaking that apart to help inform where you're going to put particular pieces of content, what you're trying to get somebody to do, right? Ultimately, you're just trying to move someone from the start of the story to the end of the story.
Yeah.
And so that is sort of our organizing principle, is to have that tenant or to have that story really well written, which we can then pull pieces out of and put in specific places. So
Interesting.
the first time you do it for a website is obviously hard. And then as you refresh it, you refresh your story, you refresh the content, it becomes quite a bit easier.
So what does the story sound like? Like, yeah, give us an example. Like, what's a story, either for Flex or for Apple Computer? Like what does that story sound like?
Yeah. So, I mean, stories follow a specific arc, like every good story does, right? There's like what's happening in the world. What are the challenges in that world? What happens if you can overcome these challenges? How a customer will describe their solution to them. Then there's the solution and your proof as an example. That's one way to do it. There's tons of stuff on LinkedIn about Disney's storytelling structure and how you can apply that to your business. Pixar, right? Apple, those all exist.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the important part is like what makes a good story versus a bad story. And as I tool around and look at different companies, the at least from my perspective, the clear thing that separates a good story from a bad story is who the story is about. And if you go look at a lot of companies' websites, especially some of the ones that are earlier in their career, earlier in their life cycle as a business, they tend to be very focused on them, and not on the customer.
Yeah, me.
Me. Here's what I do. Here's what I do. Here's what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, here's the feature. Blah. Like, God, no one cares. And when you have to do that stuff, of course you do. But ultimately your story is it has to be about the customer and how you solve their problems. And so that requires you being clear on what their problems are and talking to customers and understanding what the impacts are, how they describe them, how they describe their solution, etc. Like, so, you can have a story in a particular structure and execute it well, but if it's not based on like the actual customer, then it's sort of all for naught.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So customers got to be at the center of the story. There's got to be some drama to it. So there's got to be some problems. Like, it should start basically with their problems, and then point to some different potential solutions, and then swoop around finally with your solution.
That's framework. That's a way to, there's lots of different frameworks.
Yeah. I'm trying to wrap my head around this because like a lot of people talk about storytelling. I'm trying to, and I know I've seen really good examples of it, and I know I've experienced really good examples of it, like without ever really hearing the whole story chronologically. Like, you kind of get a sense of what that story is sometimes, probably when it's done really well.
Yeah.
Like, what famous brands do you think do it really well? Like in their own marketing, like does Starbucks, like what's Starbucks' story?
Yeah. Well, I think to your point, I don't know that any of us could articulate the best stories that they're telling us, right? Like Apple's obviously extremely good at it.
Yeah.
Starbucks is pretty good at it. Like the brands that are really Coke is pretty good at it. Of course they are. But those are all like B2C brands. Right. And that's a little bit of a different thing. So I think there are some brands that are B2B that are pretty good at it. To be honest, I don't know that I could name one. I think as you think about like really big companies, it gets really hard. Think about big enterprise software companies. They sell a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I think Microsoft has gotten quite good at it.
Yeah.
They've refined their focus over the last few years to be focused on the cloud and enabling their customers to use their products across devices. Like that story has clearly resonated. So I think more important, it's easier to spot the bad ones, and the good ones are just sort of ingrained in your brain.
Yeah. Well, you gave me an idea. You know how sometimes you'll see large B2B brands like IBM, for instance, advertising on network television?
Yeah.
Like I think they ran that one commercial where it was like the baby was clicking the buy button repetitively. And then back at the factory, they're like, guys, like orders are just going bananas. Like,
Yeah.
and it showed this whole thing where like the trucks are coming, and then it flashes back to the baby just going bing, 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 bing.
Yeah.
I think that was IBM. I'm not sure, but that's kind of a story, right? That's saying like,
Yep.
hey, like let us do your business intelligence, like we'll help you separate the signal from the noise. Like you
Yep.
need us so that you don't, experience this mistake that this company experienced. And they kind of never even say like IBM is the best. They just like hit their logo at the end.
Yep. Yeah.
Or like a logo and a tagline, basically.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the mistakes, everybody does this. I do this. We all do this. Is you try to tell the whole story every time.
Yeah.
That's not possible. Right.
Yeah.
Like it depends on format, depends on context. It depends on time. Like you've got a 30-second TV spot. You can't do it.
Yeah.
So, you see car companies, and the car companies are a good example. They spend their time talking about the products a lot because the problem is generally known, right? Like they don't need to spend a whole lot of time there.
Yeah.
Or they do it in other places, or they'll talk more about like their electric vehicles, for example, which is referencing a problem.
Yeah.
So it's different. I think it just all depends.
And like Tesla, well, I don't think Tesla even really runs commercials, but their story, I think, is like, we're saving the world basically by taking everybody and everything electric and doing it in style. Like these things look great. They're fast. They're smooth.
Yep.
If they were to articulate it in a nutshell, and that like goes along in line with their vision or their mission as a company,
Yep.
So would you say that those two things are like always need to be aligned? Like whatever your mission and your vision should be like kind of the core component of your story?
Well, that's a good question. I think my short answer is yes. And there's a longer version where your mission or vision might be your 10 or 20 year thing.
Yeah.
And so like, it's great to have a 10 or 20 year mission or vision, but it has to be applicable today. And most often, especially with startups as an example, like you are nowhere near delivering on your mission. And so, your story should likely reference it, at least some of the values or the benefits of this future world that you described, but it also has to include what you can actually deliver. Like what problem are you solving now in the real world, not just what sort of hypothetical thing you might be able to solve 10 years from now, because that's not actionable.
Yeah. I really like frameworks and templates, like fill in the blank style templates to make things easier.
Yeah.
But do you think that if most companies were to go to their website and change out the language, like say on the homepage, instead of being like, best financial modeling software for banks, right?
Yeah.
Instead of that, to start the sentence with, we're on a mission to, and then eradicate this this painful problem?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, is that always a step in the right direction, do you think? You're still talking about yourself because you're saying our mission, but like
Yeah.
we're on a mission to
Yeah.
transform financial models in the banking system or something.
Yep. I mean, I would never say always, because like the answer is always, it depends.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, however, I would probably say just no, because then you're making it about you.
Yeah.
Like as soon as you say we, the story's about you.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to communicate that you solve a particular problem, can't make it about you.
Yeah.
Like your mission statement, yeah, should that be on your website? Probably. Should it, help clarify like why you do what you do? Yeah, probably. But I think most companies, and websites are just examples, right? I think most companies tend to focus on sort of features and functionality as opposed to problems. And I go to lots of websites where I look at it and it's a beautiful description of a feature that I have no idea if it's helpful to me or not. I don't know.
Yeah.
That requires a lot more work on my part, and God, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I think, customer problems are a good place to start, I think, at least from a website. But it also just depends on service you provide, who your customers are, what your price points are, how known in the market you are. I mean, there's just a ton of different variables.
Yeah. So at what point in your career trajectory did this become like your superpower? Like did you learn this back in the mobile ad days, or did you just learn this at more recently at Flex? Like when did this?
Yeah, more recently at Flex. I don't know that this is my superpower, by the way. I tend not to, I'm not sure I have any of those, but I've been lucky to have like really great mentors and bosses who have helped sort of shape my worldview. But it's been more recent. But I think that, story is an important part of all of our lives.
Yeah.
And it's the recognition of that is the most important, and the willingness to say like, okay, once you get the story right, you have to repeat it consistently and clearly every single time, or at least portions of it every single time. Like that's the hard part. Mm-hmm. Like there's a whole bunch of frameworks and templates for storytelling. Anybody can go find those, but it's like how you apply them. So let me give you an example. So one of the key things that you see a lot of marketers use is messaging frameworks. And those messaging frameworks are often a Excel spreadsheet. They have columns that say like features, and then below that they will say benefits, and they over here it'll be like value proposition, whatever. Yeah. And those are fine, but they exist without context. They exist without problem. They exist without story. And so when you have those, it's really hard to find places to use them without it coming across. You're just talking about yourself all the time.
Right.
So we actually don't use those at all. And we haven't for a long time because of that exact problem. It's just like, okay, well, these are just my messages. Like, who cares? No one cares about this. So we stopped using that stuff entirely.
All right. Well, so let's talk about Flex a little bit.
Okay.
Any last words on brevity and good story before we transition over to Flex?
Any parting? I wouldn't like. Yeah, I think the important part about brevity is to be clear. And sometimes being clear means not being brief, and you need to expand. You need to use more words, but you need to be thoughtful about that. And the other piece of this, and this is nuance, is that when you write, there's lots of sort of cliches. Paul Graham is one of the most widely referenced. Like writing is the process by which you recognize you don't know what you think you know, or you don't understand something well enough, right? And I think that's true. But the other part is like really understanding like how a reader reads and how they're going to engage with your content. And so I always recommend people like read what they're writing out loud, because if you read it out loud and you're too brief, or you have too many punchy sentences, then it's like, it's just not good.
Yeah.
Or if you're like writing like walls of text and read it out loud, you want to jump off a bridge afterwards. You're like, oh my God, I'm boring myself. Right.
Yeah.
So that's an easy, just like personal check of like, does this make sense? Does this work?
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Sweet. So, talk to me about Flex. Tell me, seems like you've just been getting like promoted on like clockwork basically every year. How long have you been in the SVP marketing role?
I wouldn't say I've been getting promoted every year, but that's nice for you to say that. So I've been at Flex for, almost 8 years now. And I've owned a variety of different things from, I started as sort of like a jack of all trades guy who just needed to do a bunch of stuff, and I had done a lot of it.
Yeah.
And so, because my background is varied across sales and marketing and product, I could come in and do a variety of different things. So I've owned everything from our SDR team. I owned sales ops pretty unsuccessfully for a little bit. I owned partnerships, I owned marketing, and then just more recently, over the last 4 years, I shouldn't even say recently, over the last 4+ years, I've focused my time and energy almost exclusively on marketing. And that's largely because we've hired other people who are experts in those things to run those.
Yeah.
You
were employee groups. Number?
I have no idea. Somewhere between 5 and 15. I don't actually remember.
So very early on. Yeah. So you were there in the startup days.
That's right. So my memory is we had about 8 people when I showed up. There had been a couple who'd been there before and left. But I don't actually know.
Interesting.
There's 2 people who've been at Flex longer than I have. One is our CEO and founder. And another is a guy who started just a couple weeks before me. So
interesting. Very cool.
I'm a long timer at this point. And so I've been through each of the different stages of the business, from like, is this actually a thing, to, oh my gosh, this might be a thing. We got to do, like, we now actually have to make it work.
Yeah.
We've now grown to a meaningful size, over 400 employees, lots of revenue and big customers. And, so it's been fun to be through each of the different various stages. And, 8 years is a long time, but it's not nearly so long when the company changes every 2 years, like a totally different company.
Yeah. And how are you guys doing it? Like, how are you growing so quickly?
How are we growing so quickly? Like, the reality is, and we've all been exposed to this, especially over the last 3 years, is supply chain is difficult, it's complicated, it's messy, and the world is changing more rapidly than it ever has in the past. And you're getting sort of part of our story here. Like, historically, supply chain and consumer behavior is all pretty predictable, right? Like, for years and years and years, if you wanted to buy something, you would get in your car, you would go to the mall, you would go to the grocery store, you would go, to some number of stores that had things you need to buy, right? If you work that back in time, it's like, okay, well, cool. So supply chains were built to deliver things to those stores. Maybe not every time, but it's close enough for purposes of this conversation. And now you have a couple different things happening. One, obviously, the internet and e-commerce has wildly changed humans' expectations. 2, you have just the general movement of people, which seems to be accelerating from, both in like the center of the country out and the coasts in. Like, people are moving, they're changing locations, right? Like, that has an impact. And then because of the complexity of the world, there's just so much more opportunity for disruption in a supply chain. So that can be from things like COVID, which had massive impacts. That can be as simple as things like ships getting stuck in the Suez Canal.
Yeah.
It can be tariffs. It can be weather. I mean, the reality is the weather has changed and there are more dramatic weather events, and those impact supply chains.
Yeah.
And so all of those problems manifest to creating big challenges for supply chains, especially big companies.
Yeah.
And so, that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is, we have continued to build for our customers and solve their problems. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. Like, can you solve my problem or not?
Yeah.
So,
And how are you guys getting customers? Like, are they coming from digital marketing mostly, or is it a lot of word of mouth? Or
so we are, we sell to the enterprise, and we have high ACVs. We don't use that term, but colloquially, it's close enough. So we have an enterprise sales team. We have a BDA team, SDR function. Marketing provides air cover, provides ground support for the commercial team. We've been more active with like direct demand gen activities, and have started to see that pay off as our brand awareness and just visibility in the market has increased. We've been able to focus more on that and see results.
yeah.
But it's an enterprise sales motion, like 100% enterprise sales motion.
Interesting. That's cool. So you got a lot of outbound going, it sounds like. Probably some ABM, like some account based stuff.
I mean, for the most part, like everything we do is ABM, like to some extent. There's just the various levels of it, right? There's like, how targeted do we want to get? And we do use some single company ABM stuff.
Cool.
But also vertically oriented, right? Like there's a whole bunch of different tactics we deploy.
Nice. So tell me a win story. I love win stories. Can you think of a campaign or any kind of marketing motion that you guys did over the years that has just was a standout in terms of performance or in terms of impact?
Yeah. We have done. Let me think about this for a second, or at least how I want to answer it.
We can come back to that one if you want.
No, I have an answer. I'm just trying to decide how I want to say it.
I'm sure you must. You must have.
We do.
Lots
There's just
of
not
them at
that.
this point.
Yeah. So, this is a really good question. And I think, like, yes, we have some win stories where we have done integrated campaign, which is part of our motion, where we run a set of marketing plays combined with PR, combined with thought leadership, combined with events, combined with sales activity. And those tend to work. And we've had some really big successes with those, frankly, but they're super unpredictable.
Yeah.
Like, it is impossible to know. And we've had ideas that I thought for sure were going to deliver for us, and they fall flat on their face. And that's okay. I think the important thing is you have to be comfortable with just doing, this is going to sound cheesy, but you just have to be comfortable doing the right things repeatedly over a long period of time. Like and be willing to kill the things that are providing value. Right.
Yeah.
So, we talk a lot about this really still working. Should we not do this anymore? Just because we did it a year ago doesn't mean we should do it today.
Yeah.
I think that's how you win in the long run. It's just consistency and repeatability and having a really high bar for what goes out the door to push your story. And sometimes you're going to get lucky and you're going to hit with a campaign, and that's upside. But it's really, in my opinion, it's the day to day that is really what's going to drive you over the long term.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And getting like really busy with activities is one of the easiest things to do as a marketer. Like there's just so much to do all the time.
Yep.
It can be sneaky and really easy to just slip into this trap of like busyness. And I'm just like busy all the time, meeting and calls and
yep.
Like, when am I actually doing the marketing?
Yep. Yeah. It's a really hard problem. And it is in all of our nature to end up there. And it requires you to like be really thoughtful. Like, is this really helping? Like, are we really moving the ball forward? And so, we are, and I am pretty particular about like what we set as our objectives, what we define as our priorities, and then, what we define as the things we aren't going to do. And I think that list of what you aren't going to do is the most important part.
Yeah.
Because it gives people a framework for how do I make a decision about whether I should spend time on this particular thing or not.
Yeah.
And if you've answered that question already, then you sort of free people up from having to make all these sort of like micro day-to-day decisions. Is it important? Is it not?
Yeah.
We've already said it's not. Don't do that. Or yes, we've said this is important. Please do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the hard parts about being a leader of any team, regardless of marketing or not, is just having clarity for what are the priorities and what aren't the priorities.
Totally. Yeah. And then as priorities shift, it's like, the CEO just emailed me like, guys, we got to do this thing. And then they're like, but wait, didn't you just tell me to do this thing? Like,
yeah,
I'm confused.
Yeah.
But okay,
Yeah.
just put that on hold.
Yeah.
I get it, man. What are you guys challenged by? Like, what are some of the challenges that you're struggling with?
Yeah.
Except too many meetings.
I think we are there. Like one, the market right now is obviously hard. It's hard for everybody.
Yeah.
So I think we are, and it has flipped really fast. Right. So that requires you to reprioritize pretty quickly, especially from a message perspective. Like we went pretty quick from like growth messaging to like cost savings messaging, right? Like that's a big shift for people. So that's one thing. The second thing is just the reality that buying behavior changes really fast. And a channel or a tactic that worked 6 months ago just doesn't work in the same way.
Yeah.
Or a campaign that we ran 3 months ago has sort of run out of steam and we don't think there's any opportunity to push it. I'm just giving examples.
Yeah.
So, I think there's never a shortage of like what's hard. But it always comes back to, at least in my opinion, of like being clear about what the story is and being flexible on how you execute it, in the market. And so your tactics and channels may change consistently. What can't change is the story and how you're trying to help customers. But how they buy or how they engage is going to change. That is always hard.
Totally. Yeah. And same thing happened in our business too. Like, pre-pandemic, especially, it was all about growth. Even during the pandemic, a lot of it was about growth and capture market share. But today, like everybody's in cost savings.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, we have always been somewhat conservative, like in how we think about what we're going to spend on. And so, for us, it's really just being thoughtful about like, is this the right thing to do? Do we think we're going to get the return on it? Is it going to advance our story in some way, shape, or form? Because if it is, then we should do it. If it's not, we should be thoughtful about, should we do something else or should we just kill this?
Yeah. And what do you guys consider? Because I imagine it's a pretty long selling cycle in your world, like 3 months, 6 months. 12 months
can be long. Yeah.
So, and that's really challenging, right? Like, how do you tie that back after so much time? But what do you consider? So like, if you put, a campaign into market, and I know there's a lot of variables, right? But just like all things equal, if you put a campaign into market and say you spend $5,000 or $10,000, whatever that number is, what kind of like, what's your minimum required thing, metric, whatever that is, like after 30 days or 60 days, where you like, how do you make that call at that point?
Yep. Yeah. So we actually don't attribute or try not to attribute single campaigns or single activities back to revenue. Because we're enterprise and because it can take a long time, we think more just about like influence and engagement. And so we'll often look more at like, are we driving engagement with this particular piece of content or this particular campaign? And if the answer is yes, then we should do it more. If the answer is no, then we should reassess. Because we recognize that it's not going to be, we're going to do a campaign that's going to turn into a lead, that's going to turn into an opportunity, and that's going to close. Like that's not how it works for us. Sometimes it does. And it'd be great if that were always true, but it's just not. And so, it comes back to just being thoughtful about and understanding that it's not one thing that's ever going to push something over the line. It's a whole combination of stuff from humans, from marketing activity, like they all help. But it's just one part of the puzzle. So I think
when you say engagement, do you mean like clicks, click-through rate type of thing, or?
Yeah, so we do probably not dissimilar to lots of companies. We attach points to different actions a customer or prospect might take, from opening an email all the way up to downloading a report, all the way up even further to calling us or, submitting a form because they want to talk to sales. And so as those engagement points change, especially in relation to a particular campaign, we can get a sense of whether or not something's working.
Well, a lot of those are, they're kind of lead metrics, right? Because like nobody would have opened an email if they hadn't opted in, unless it was like a cold outbound email.
Yeah.
Or like nobody would, like if somebody downloaded a report, say, then by definition, they would have already been a lead, or that would be becoming a lead.
Yep. Yeah.
Do you have, this is actually just related to something I was thinking about before, but do you guys use any pre-conversion signals, or do you assign any points to any pre-conversion signals?
Pre-conversion meaning like website visits, like intent data,
anonymous. Yeah, like anonymous.
Yeah. Yep, we do.
At the anonymous points.
Yeah, we do. We do at the account level. That gets really hard for obvious reasons. But we absolutely do that. And so we try to understand, like recognizing that there's probably a big margin of error and we'd like it to be smaller. And so we do measure anonymous traffic and anonymous intent as a representation of what an account is thinking about. And then we try to convert that into anonymous activity engagement, either with a human sales or through marketing efforts.
Yeah. The reason that got me thinking was because I'm looking at this tool right now, which it basically does like lead scoring models for anonymous visitors based on many, many thousands of data points and many, many thousands of historic sessions. So like if you go back through hundreds of thousands or millions of web sessions and you can identify like which ones were the best or which ones, had the highest propensity to do blank, it apparently just like analyzes many signals all in real time to predict who the best visitors will be. And then it pipes that data back to the ad platform. So like LinkedIn, for instance, could see, okay, from these 1,000 visitors, like these 6 have a high propensity to convert.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we have clients, like especially B2B clients that are doing a lot of smaller campaigns. Like they're not necessarily generating the dozens or the hundreds of leads that you need to generate like in a 30-day period to really signal back to the algorithm to train on what's quality.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really, we have a wide and varied tech stack, some of which tries to account for some of that. I think it's really hard, especially when you have a small set of accounts or a small-ish number of humans. Like when you're in a consumer business, it's a lot easier, right? And you can run lookalikes and there's a whole bunch of different things you can do. it's harder in a B2B setting.
Yeah, I would say for sure. Because your audience is just so hard to reach.
Yep, exactly.
But it's also easier to gain like a large share of mind within that
That's right.
smaller audience pool.
That's right.
I mean, it's less expensive.
Yeah. I guess it depends sometimes. If they're very senior, it's not less expensive.
What's your tech stack? What are you guys using? Salesforce, Marketo, 6sense?
We use some version. Yes. We don't use Marketo. But we use Salesforce. We use Pardot. We use 6sense. We use a variety of others.
Interesting. How long have you been on 6sense?
It's been recently. Just
Oh.
recently.
Does Salesforce have their own version of 6sense? What 6sense is like a customer data platform? Like what category do you put that in?
I think
10?
a lot of categories. I don't know. I haven't thought deeply about it. So I don't know if I can give you an answer, to be honest.
Yeah.
We could put it in ad tech. We could put it in predictive analytics. We could put it in
Because it's like kind of
customer
like
data platform.
And it's almost like a DMP, or not a DMP, but like a DSP. Like you can run ads through it also.
Yeah. That's one of our main use cases is for advertising.
Interesting. Cool. When you guys looked at 6sense, did you look at other things too? Or did you basically just find 6sense and go with it?
The demand gen team did look at a variety of options, and their recommendation was 6sense. So that's the part that I was involved in.
I got it. That makes sense. Yeah, because they have like that engagement metric, which they just call it engagement. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Are you guys liking it?
We just started, but I think I'm excited about the opportunities that it hopefully provides for us. But I don't know that I could give you an answer today.
Yeah, not just yet.
Like it's been a couple months.
Gotcha. Cool, Ryan. Well, this was great. Congratulations, by the way. I didn't mention, I saw you guys raised a nice round last year, the Series D round. So congratulations on that. You want to go to the lightning round?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. So question number 1, as always, if you were to start a side hustle, what side hustle would that be?
I would not start a side hustle. And the reason for that is I am more than busy enough with my current job, and I've got a family and kids, and my goal in life is not to work all the time. Like there's a finite amount of time in the world, and I would prefer to spend as much of it as I can with the people closest to me. I get no emotional benefit out of doing stuff like that. So don't.
Cool. Well, that I would say is a legitimate answer. I've never had that answer before, but I'll take it. Next up, top 3 books or authors or influencers that have had an impact on you.
Yep. So I have read, this isn't a lightning round answer, but I'm going to give it anyway. Like, I feel like I've read like every marketing book, and I feel like I'm always like wildly disappointed because they are all done in hindsight. And it is never, ever true that what worked for somebody else will work for you. And so I stopped reading most like business specific books and tend to read more like sort of mental model framework books. So I really liked Principles by Ray Dalio. I have liked all of Annie Duke's books, which is all about sort of decision making and mental models. And then I'll give you a third one, which is not a business book, but it's my favorite book of all time, which is Lonesome Dove. And the reason that Lonesome Dove, this goes back to the first part of our conversation, that it is probably the greatest story ever told, with the character development to match. And so, like, as someone who cares deeply about writing and story, I think that is a really good example of just like a perfectly executed story. Mm-hmm. So I'd put that in my top 3. And then I'll give you some add-on answers. I think, like, there's a whole bunch of, like the Knowledge Project podcast, I think is really good. And I listen to a lot. because it just has a variety of people and how they think about the world, which I always think is super beneficial.
The Knowledge Project.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
I'll check that out. Yeah, I like stuff like that too. I love frameworks and mental model type stuff.
Yep. Yep.
Cool. And finally, what do you do to avoid burnout and to help your team avoid burnout?
Yep. So I've been doing this for long enough that I recognize that when I'm good and when I'm not good. And so, one, two, I also recognize that my priority in life is not to work 100 hours a week. It's to be around the people that I care about. And so I set a pretty strict schedule for myself. So that's one way to avoid burnout. Sometimes it oscillates, goes up or down.
Yeah.
And as part of that, I have to be okay and comfortable with the fact there's just some things aren't going to get done. And there is no shortage of things to do. That will always be true. You can't do them all, and you just got to accept it. So that's one of the ways I avoid burnout. Mm-hmm. I hope that I help the team avoid burnout by being clear about what we're not going to do and deprioritizing things. I think and know I can be better at that because it's hard. But we try to optimize for the people and making sure that they're in a good place so that they can do their best work.
Yeah.
We're not perfect at it, just like I'm not perfect at it for myself, but we try.
I feel you. Well, that's about as good an answer as any. Well, Ryan, thank you so very much for being here today. To the listeners, thank you for being here as well. If you learned something today or if you laughed a little, tell a friend about it. Ryan, if people here are interested to learn more about you or Flex, where would you direct them?
To learn more about Flex, you can visit our website, flex.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, probably the best place.
Yep. And that's Flex with an E. So FLEXE.com.
That's right.
Cool. Well, Ryan, stick around. For everybody at home listening, thanks again. This has been another episode of Revenue Driven CMO. We'll see you next time. And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us here today. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at revenuedrivencmo.com. That's revenuedrivencmo.com. And hey, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, Web Mechanics will do 10 to 20 hours of work for you for free. Literally no sales calls, no BS. Just give them a problem and they will put a team to work for you for free for 10 to 20 hours. Even if you're already a client, if you're struggling with demand gen, lead gen, SEO, SEM, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, conversion optimization, if you can't get Facebook or Meta ads to work for the life of you, or you can't figure out attribution, Web Mechanics will take a good hard look at whatever problem you give them, whatever programs you put in front of them, and they will give you an objective, informed opinion, plus some advice from 10 to 20 hours of senior level attention. And that's just because you're a listener of this podcast. So I would suggest take them up on this offer. It's ridiculous. Go to revenuedrivencmo.com/free, fill out the 2-minute form, and you will not regret it. Literally zero downside, unlimited potential for growth. So do yourself a favor, revenuedrivencmo.com/free, no hyphens, no punctuations. You will be happy about that decision.